Good afternoon. I have the lovely Doug with me. Hello, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Donna. Yeah, I'm Doug Johnstone. I'm a writer, obviously, that's why I'm here. I've had 13 novels published, 10 standalone books. I guess they're kind of thrillers, domestic noir, I don't really know what you call them. They all kind of broadly fall into the crime genre. And most recently, I've written 3 novels, which are a trilogy and part of a longer series now, actually, about 3 women called the Skelfs, who are 3 generations of women who run funeral directors and private investigators in Edinburgh when the patriarch of the family dies. That's your elevator pitch for those. So that's kind of what I'm immersed in at the moment, is those Skelf books. So that's me. I write weird, I guess crime novels that don't really fall directly into the mainstream. I think they're more kind of on the edges of the genre, which is exactly where I like to be.
Did you always know that you wanted to be a writer?
Yes and no. I've always written. I was writing stuff at school. I was writing short stories at school, but I didn't really think it was a thing. I mean, like a lot of people, maybe my age, when I did English at school, we didn't read a single book that was written by someone who was still alive. It was all like old white dead guys, you know, from the previous century quite often. And so I just presumed that all writers were old, white, and dead. And so I didn't really think that it was a thing. It was kind of, I mean, it was in the time before you got like authors visiting schools and stuff like that. It didn't really happen. And so I didn't really think of it as a thing to be. I just enjoyed doing it. And I kind of, we might talk about this later, but I did come at writing, sort of being a published writer, a very sort of circuitous route. My first novel wasn't out until I was 36. And in that time I had been, you know, I'd been a physicist and had a PhD and worked as an engineer and also a music journalist and various other things as well. So I've been around the houses, but I was always kind of still writing in the background. I was running fanzines, you know, writing for arts publications and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed the writing process. It was actually only when I started to take myself seriously as a writer that things started to actually progress. So it wasn't something I'd say I always enjoyed writing, but I didn't always want to be a writer because that didn't seem like an option.
So what made you take the plunge and go for it and write properly?
Well, that's interesting. I was, I mean, after I graduated, I went to Edinburgh University. I grew up in a small town in the northeast of Scotland. I went to Edinburgh University and I was studying physics, and I quite enjoyed that. And then I eventually got a job as an engineer, which I hated. I was a systems engineer, working in the aerospace industry. And I just couldn't stand that job. I just didn't see the point of it. I wasn't interested in it. I did that for 4 years, but increasingly over that time I was like running a fanzine with some friends, doing a lot of writing on the side. I was in bands, so I used to interview other bands, review gigs and albums and stuff like that. And I started to get some stuff. I started to sort of put myself out there as a music journalist, and I was getting stuff published in like the List magazine here in Scotland, which is kind of listings thing, like Time Out equivalent, and the local newspapers and stuff like that. And I just sort of thought, well, you know, I could actually make a go of this. So I quit my high-paid graduate office job and became a freelance music writer. I think much to my mother's disgust still. But it was really interesting because I mean this was like 20 years ago now, and it was a time when you could just about still make a living as a freelance journalist. I think that's the bottom's fallen out of that very much. But so what happened was I was actually a lot busier than a 9 to 5, because I was continually hustling for work. You know, as a freelance, your answer to every question, Donna, is like, can you write about this? The answer is always yes. Yes, whatever it is. I don't care what it is. I can definitely write about it. Then you go and find out what it is. So I basically, I was really busy hustling, but my main job was writing. It was like putting sentences together. It was journalism, all of it. Started off music journalism, but then also literary journal. I was like interviewing other authors, which was great, and doing also anything basically. I did restaurant reviews for a while, which is a nice gig if you can get it, and things like that. And so because I was writing for my main job, I just started to take my own fiction writing seriously. I had kind of written short stories before that, and kind of thrown them into like competitions and anthologies and sort of submitted them to things and never really gotten anywhere. And so it was round about a couple of years after I started as a journalist, I started working on my first novel properly, which was terrible, obviously. And I sent it out to people and everyone rejected it. But a couple of folk rejected it quite nicely and said, if there's anything else you're writing, we'd love to see it. So that was kind of enough of a kick up the arse to keep going. You know, I wasn't completely wasting my time. And so that's kind of how it, I mean, that's how I got into it from that side, because part of it is a confidence trick. Like, not only, like, I always think of writing as a confidence trick in a couple of ways. One, you're trying to trick the reader into believing this world you've created, right? But also you're trying to trick yourself into believing that you can do it. Like, fake it till you make it sort of thing, that you can just keep going and going, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm just going to keep trying until someone says, yeah, it's not that bad. I think that's my basic thinking.
That's all authors. You're all insecure, quivering little wrecks that just need constant reassurance that you're fine, that you're good. It's all good.
Well, it's a weird sort of juxtaposition. There's definitely that element to it. Like, we're all like massively insecure and like very emotionally connected to the stuff we're doing. So that, you know, if anyone, you know, you get a bad review and, you know, you crumble apart. But also there's like the exact opposite. There's an element of that as well. You have to be really ballsy to sort of think, well, who the hell cares about what I'm doing? Like, because you have to think, well, someone else is going to want to read this ultimately. Maybe it's just stubborn headedness, but it just feels like there is an element where you have to have a really thick skin and just go, this is what I want to write, and I really hope that someone wants to read it, and, you know, and then just deal with the consequences afterwards.
I know, weird. All of you weird as well, in the nicest possible way, but weird.
Yeah, I'll take that. Yeah, nice and weird.
Yeah. If you were to be picked up and transported as a character into one of your own books, which book would you choose?
Oh, wow. Which one of my own books, if I was to be transported into it? Well, that's a very good question. You're right. You're getting some good questions already. That's a very interesting question. I think something like, I don't know, do I want to be terrified in it? Probably. I mean, the sensible part of you says you want to go into the book which is the safest environment for where you're probably not going to get killed. But actually, the most exciting thing would be to do the exact opposite. I don't know, something like, actually, well, I'll tell you what, actually, that's a good one. Fault Lines, my novel Fault Lines, which was the only one I've written so far that is, it's kind of a speculative fiction book. It's set in a sort of different version of Edinburgh where the whole of Scotland is like an earthquake and volcano zone. So there's like regular earthquakes, and there's a new volcanic island off the coast of Edinburgh in the Firth of Forth. And I would love to experience that, even though it's probably going to be terrifying. You know, you speak to people from actual earthquake zones and they say, no, you wouldn't want to do that. But I think it would be fascinating to live and, you know, be walking down the street in Princess Street in Edinburgh and have, like, you know, the earth literally shaking under your feet and seeing like volcanoes erupting in the distance. That would be quite cool. So let's go for that.
If you were to choose one of your characters to take out for a meal, who would you choose and what would you ask them?
Who would I take out for a meal and what would I ask them? That's another very good question. I think, yeah, who would I take out for a meal? Wow. I think it would be one of the, I'm just like one person, right? So I think I would probably take out one of the Skelf women from the Skelf's books that are out at the moment. I think I would take Jenny out. She's the one that's, she's, just to explain, if anyone hasn't read the books. So there's three women from different generations. Dorothy is 70 at the start of the first book, and Jenny's 45 and Hannah's 20. And they're all like, you know, mother and daughter to each other, grandmother, mother and daughter. And sort of Dorothy is like the one that everyone loves because she's super chill and she's kind of very sorted and she just kind of gets things done. Hannah's kind of young and enthusiastic and a bit all over the place, but Jenny's a sort of Generation X, like fuck up. She's just like, she's got all sorts of problems and she doesn't deal with the world very well. And for that reason, I think she's the least sympathetic of the three of them, which is a kind of the reason why I think I like her most, actually, or I like writing her most, because there's like a real grist to the mill there. So I would definitely take her out for a meal, and I would just want to grab her and say, what the hell's wrong with you? Get a grip. Like, look at your amazing mum and your amazing daughter and like what lives they've got, and like try and live a little bit more like them. But that would make the book less interesting, I think so.
That's true. What character's given you the most trouble?
The most trouble? Well, there's a couple maybe. I mean, some of my early books were definitely, the central characters were written to be very provocative. Like I didn't do sympathetic central characters for quite a long time, if at all, ever, that could be argued. My second novel, The Ossians, the central character was a young man called Connor who, so the Ossians is about a unsigned indie band who tour the Highlands and kind of fall apart in a mess of drinking drugs. And that's all Connor's fault. It's basically, he's very self-destructive. So he was full of trouble. Like, I mean, he was great to, the ones that are trouble are the ones that are like great to write about, actually, because like, because he's so hopeless. Like, it gives you, like, anytime you put him in any situation, he just makes it worse, which is like fantastic. And the other character that springs to mind, obviously, is in terms of actually giving the world trouble, is Barry from Breakers. So I wrote a novel called Breakers, which is set in Niddrie and Craigmillar in Edinburgh, which is the poorest part of Edinburgh. And the central characters has a half brother called Barry, who is, well, I always had in my head like a vision of Begbie from Trainspotting for Barry. Is that, I mean, he's not quite like that, but that was the benchmark. So he's certainly uncompromisingly bad, and violent and aggressive and nasty. So yeah, he creates a lot of trouble.
Do you hide any secret jokes or messages or Easter eggs in your books?
Well, Easter eggs, I'm not sure you would call them Easter eggs. There's stuff always goes in the books that is from other things. Like I mean, each book has probably got 100 things in it that only I know about, like where that came from. So I don't really, it's not like an Easter egg. I did a thing where two of the standalone novels are kind of linked, or at least they're in the same world. Like someone who's a central character in one turned up as a background character in another. Which I quite like doing that sort of stuff. That's good. I mean, in my mind, all the books are connected. They're all in, like, you know, Johnstone world or whatever. The Johnstone, was it like the MCU, like the yeah, extended Johnstone universe. So I kind of see them all as being together, but they're not really that explicit. But in terms of Easter eggs, I mean, there's also all sorts of little things. I sometimes, because I've been in bands for years and years and years, and I just noticed, actually, I'm doing the edits of the fourth Skelfs book at the moment. And I sneaked in a phrase that's the title of a song from a band I used to be in. Now, there's literally only like 3 people in the world who are going to get that, and I'm one of them. So I suppose that is, I mean, it's like the most obscure of Easter eggs that you could imagine, but that's probably the kind of thing that I get up to.
Awesome. In your books, you must have killed your characters in some horrible ways, but if you were to be a fictional murderer, how would you kill your victims?
Oh, how would you kill your victims? Well, I mean, really, simplest is best. Like, you just don't want to, you know, I mean, I always think the easiest way is just to get somebody somewhere remote and push them off a cliff or something like that into like deep water, right? Because you're not getting covered in blood. There's no, like, you're immediately getting rid of the evidence thanks to gravity and into the sea, right? Because bodies just disappear. Even if it washes up, it's probably going to be, you know, all sorts of, it'll be nibbled by fishes or, you know, battered by rocks. You can tell I've thought about this. So it's like, I think that's, I mean, I really keep it simple. Like, I think so often in fiction, like, people have elaborate kind of ways of killing their victims, or, like, you know, the characters in their books. And I think in real life, like, so often that's the thing that gets you caught out, is that it's too complicated. And I think the other thing that is really unrepresentative in crime fiction is that, you know, the vast majority of people who commit murder are actually really stupid. Like, they just don't think about things like, I mean, they don't think about forensic evidence in the way that I do as a writer or you as a reader does. Okay, they don't bother about that. They're just like, oh, I'm angry at that guy, I'm going to hit him with a rock. Or whatever, I'm going to punch a guy outside a pub and then he's going to hit his head off the curb and that's going to be him. Or I'm going to hit this guy with a car and then drive off because I panic. You know, and I've written about that a little bit, you know, about that sort of moment of panic when you end up, you know, accidentally maybe, or slightly deliberately, or you're not quite sure killing someone, and then it's all about the aftermath. So I think that you want to avoid all that stuff if you're doing it in real life. Just make it as simple as possible. I mean, there was one I always loved in the fictional death I always loved was, is it Tales of the Unexpected? Did you ever watch that?
Yep.
It's great. But there was one where somebody beat her husband to death with a leg of lamb, a frozen leg of lamb. And then when the police came around, she'd cooked it and fed it to them. So they were literally eating the evidence. I thought that was nice. That was such a cool idea. But I mean, I'm sure someone else must have ripped that off by now.
Yeah, that is genius. And I couldn't think of anything better than that. It's really, yeah.
The problem's very often getting rid of the body. That's the hassle. Like killing someone, I mean, you have to decide morally whether you're up for it or not. But but getting rid of the evidence is the hard thing, because if you don't just leave them where they are, you have to then move the body, and that's not an easy thing to do. I got told off once because one of my novels, I had a bunch of people dragging a body like around a sort of cliff top walk for hours at night. And my editor at the time said, "Oh, that's just too hard. It's impossible. You can't, like, how do you do that?" So I ended up, like, they found a carpet and they rolled them up inside the carpet and carried the carpet, because that's actually easier to carry. So that was the way I got around that. But yeah, you got it rid of the body. I don't know how you do that. That's the hard bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're dragging a body around, then there's just evidence following you as well.
Yeah, it's a massive trail of like blood and DNA everywhere you go. Yeah.
Exactly. If you were to be fictionally murdered, who would you want to solve your case?
Who would I want to solve my case? That's a good one. I don't know. I'm kind of dead, so I'm not bothered.
So you'd want like the best detective on the case.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not fussed. I'm not really. Okay, let's say I've got an idea, right? Am I allowed something from television? So Jim Rockford, because I was a huge fan of the Rockford Files. And I loved that because he was kind of a bit hapless. I quite like that he wasn't like, he's not a superhero. He wasn't like a sort of brooding hunk with like, issues and an alcohol problem and stuff like that. He was just an honest guy who lived in a caravan on the beach, which, by the way, was the coolest thing ever. When I was like a kid, I thought, oh, that's amazing. And he just sort of went about the business, like, and he never pulled a gun on anyone. I don't know, very rarely. Like, he just used to basically use his smarts as it was, because he was a bit of quite a cool private detective. So yeah, Jim Rockford, although I'd probably have to die in the 1970s in California if that was the case, but I'm quite happily do that.
Yeah, that sounds terrible.
Yeah.
That's my budgie, if you're wondering what that horrific noise is.
Didn't hear it, actually. It's fine, don't worry.
Oh, I can, right through my head. Bless him. When you're editing, what's your most overused word or phrase?
Oh wow, I'm doing edits at the moment, but I've done the self edit, which is where I hopefully get rid of most of that stuff. Yeah, one of the ones, I mean, there's things that always can go. I use the word "that" all the time, which can almost always just be cut out. You don't need it. But other ones are like, you tend to find your characters doing things like nodding. Nodding's a really common one. Frowning, there's a lot of frowning going on. And so you just kind of go through, you do a search actually for, like, I've got about a dozen words, and just sort of, I mean, I don't think I grin much, but yeah. Yeah, nodding and frowning. Everyone's nodding and frowning. It's like, just keep your head still. You idiots. And it's like, when you see like several on a same page, you're like, oh my God, everybody is like, it's like little nodding dogs at the back of your car, like the little thing like that. That's what I get the impression of.
Oh, bless.
Keep your head still, you idiots.
What's been one of the most fun scenes that you've written, and what's been one of the most difficult?
Oh, okay, interesting. So fun scenes. Well, I had a lot of fun because I quite like writing like action scenes. And I think it's a really underrated thing in fiction. It's like quite hard to do it effectively, that actually you get across what's happening and it's kind of clear. But most recently in these Skelfs books, because they're about funerals and they're about death, and they're kind of definitely like sort of poignant because it's about how we deal with life in the face of death and all that stuff. But the opening scene of the second Skells book, The Big Chill, it's basically a funeral scene. So Dorothy, one of the three central characters, she's like conducting a funeral, and then in the middle of a funeral, there's like a car chase bursts into the cemetery. So like there's this guy like who's who's joyriding, is getting chased by a police car, and they sort of chase each other right round the cemetery, and then they crash and like almost hit the funeral people. They just get out of the way, but the main car, ends up in the open grave. And so that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that actually, because it's kind of ludicrous, but also shocking. And there's no, I mean, your job as a writer is to try and make it convincing. Like this, it's a confidence trick, like I said before. Like your job, if you do it right, is to make it seem like, so the reader reads that and doesn't go, "Oh, that would never happen." Like they read that and go, "Oh my God, that car just crashed into that open grave." And they just take it as like, "Oh, that's the kind of thing that happens in this book." So I really enjoyed that. That was good fun. What was the other question?
That one of the hardest.
One of the hardest. Yeah, there was there was a couple. I found it quite hard sometimes. One of my novels called The Jump, which is set in South Queensferry, just outside Edinburgh. It's just right. If you don't know the geography, Queensferry's right in the shadow of the Forth Bridge and the Forth Road Bridge, and now the Queensferry crossing. All three of those bridges are right there. And so they're really sort of weird. You're weirdly sort of ominous because you're kind of literally overlooked by these massive structures, you know. And that book was all about suicide. So the central character, her teenage son had committed suicide, had killed himself by jumping off the Forth Road Bridge, because it was a very common suicide spot. I'm not sure if it is still. It might well be. And so I was writing about that, and there was a couple of scenes in there which sort of confronted the reality of that topic, I think. Like especially the opening scene, actually, where she's kind of thinking about what she's lost and what happened and what she could have done differently. And I wrote that whole book without really thinking about what it would be like to talk about it at events and stuff like that. And so I started to do like publicity for it and, do library events and festivals and stuff. And I read that opening scene, or a part of it, at the start, and it was like sucking all the air out of the room. Everyone just was suddenly like, "Oh my God, Jesus Christ." And I think sometimes audiences didn't really recover. And so it was quite a weird book to talk about in public, because it was, and I mean, not to go into specific details, but I have some family history of suicide, so it was kind of based on some of my own experiences tangentially, and so there was elements of that book that were definitely quite hard to write, definitely.
What was I just going to ask you? What's the biggest research rabbit hole you've fallen down?
Oh wow. Yeah, you get loads actually. You spend far too long doing it. It's like, because it's classic procrastination, isn't it? That you just are like, "Oh, I've got this chapter I need to write, so I'll tell you what, I could go and just investigate some random thing for hours." What have I been thinking about recently? Well, like really recently, I spent a long time, because I did a lot of research about the funeral industry, obviously, before I started writing the Skells books. And I actually worked as a writer in residence at a funeral director's for 6 months. This was several years before I wrote the books. I wasn't intending to do it as research. I was just I actually ended up writing a non-fiction thing about the funeral industry and how these people cope with, what they have to do every day, the people who work in it. So I did a lot of investigation about, like, for example, the opening scene of the first book is an open air funeral pyre, which is not technically legal in the UK unless you get permission. So I had to do quite a lot of research online about how you do that, what temperatures you need to get at, what it looks like, what it smells like, for example, and all these kind of things. So there's lots of death stuff, which actually I found really fascinating. Recently, I'm thinking about another Skells book, and it's really interesting to look at things like green alternative funerals and stuff like that. So I've kind of gone down a massive, and I'm not sure if any of this is going to end up in a book or not, but it's really interesting about natural burials. Fair enough, that's already in the books, but there's things like resumation, which is like, it's basically, it's also called alkaline electrolysis or something. It's basically you dissolve the body in kind of water and various like actually non-toxic chemicals, and it's like a tenth as bad for the environment as cremation, and you still get ashes away at the end of it. You need to buy a resumator, which is like a big thing. It's like a massive like washing machine basically for a body, put it in and stuff like that. It's really interesting. And then I got interested in, like, you can get buried in a mushroom suit. So you wear this sort of biodegradable outfit that's got mushroom spores in it, and then basically once you're buried, the mushrooms feed off your body and then grow and create a sort of ecosystem. So that's another one. And then I was looking at other different funeral and burial ceremonies and processes in different cultures around the world, again, which is probably not going to make it in the books, but it's really interesting. There's one in India. There's a sect of the Zoroastrians who have sort of buildings called the Tower of Silence, which is where they basically, it's called excarnation. They put the bodies out to be eaten by vultures or any other carrion birds. But they build a sort of tower, and inside it there's like slots to put lots of bodies in, and then there's a big well in the middle for all the bones and that to drop in once the birds have eaten all the flesh off the bodies. It's good. It's cheery stuff, isn't it? It's good. It's like it. But one of the interesting things is that they're really struggling, the Zoroastrians in India, because the number of vultures has massively declined. So they don't have enough birds to eat the bodies anymore. So they don't really know what to do. Crows won't cut it. They don't eat enough. So yeah, so there you go. That was quite a long rabbit hole to go down. Death and its myriad of forms.
That's awesome. Do you have any phobias, and would you write about those?
I don't think I have any phobias. I can't think of anything. What are the kind of usual ones, like snakes and spiders and stuff? I'm not bothered. What else? Am I phobic to anything? No, I don't think I am. And I think if I was, well, maybe it's not easy for me to say if I don't have any phobias, but I kind of find that the things that you write about tend to be the things that unsettle you anyway. That's the good stuff, I think. I have this chat with my writer pal, Helen Fitzgerald. I don't know if you know her, read any of her books, but she's great. It's always that you can tell when someone's really mining into the stuff that really disturbs themselves, or that they don't know what they think about, or they're kind of upset about. Because that's when it gets really good. You can feel the writer sort of tapping into something, and that was, I think, certainly the case with The Jump and the subject of suicide. I think that kind of hit home emotionally. So I think as a writer, you don't always have to do this, of course, but I think that if you are willing to have a look at, like, honestly have a look at what disturbs you, or what horrifies you, then that can quite often lead to the best kind of fiction, or the most emotionally engaging fiction for the reader anyway, because they pick up on that, like, through in between the lines. I think readers pick up on whether it's something that you really feel strongly about or not. But yeah.
Pixie, she likes to come say hello. Sure, she wants to be the star.
But yeah, very cute.
Yeah, she's right. Have you made lots of author friends since you started writing?
Yeah, I have, actually. I mean, I'm not. Yeah, I didn't really know any authors when I first started off. I wasn't like, I know a lot of people go to, like, festivals like Harrogate and stuff like that, and do that long before they're published. I never really did. I used to go. I mean, I'm living in Edinburgh. I went to the Edinburgh Book Festival, but it's not the same kind of thing. But yeah, I have made a lot of author friends, I think, over the years. I mean, it's been a while now. My first book was published in 2006, so that's, quick math, 16 years, and like 13 books. So, and you do slowly get to know people over time from appearing at the same events, festivals and stuff like that. Quite often library events. And in Scotland, there's a kind of definite, there's kind of two networks I have, I think. There's like crime writers, that I always meet at places like Harrogate and other crime festivals. And then there's also Scottish writers, not necessarily genre specific, because we're always quite often at the same kind of festivals or events. And so we kind of meet each other at all these things. And yeah, a lot of them are really good friends. And that has kind of accelerated in the last few years because I'm in a band with Luca, who I believe you've spoken to. And so there's myself and Luca Vesti, Val McDermott, Mark Billingham, Chris Brookmeyer, and Stuart Neville. We're all in the Fun Loving Crime Writers, which started a few years ago, which is a band of crime writers who are doing songs about crime and murder and all that kind of stuff. So I play the drums, but that has become like a little gang. Like they're kind of my best mates now. Like we kind of just are always chucking around ideas. I mean, we start off talking about music, but we always end up talking about all sorts of other stuff. And like, just playing gigs with them. Because when you do gigs, there's a lot of sitting around doing nothing. Quite often you get your sound check and then you're either going away and getting a meal or just hanging out in the bar, whatever it is. So and after the gig, you're all kind of in the same high, try to come down from the adrenaline. And so I consider those guys definitely to be like my best writer friends these days. It's like the best idea ever was like forming that band, because it just, apart from the fun we have on stage, the rest of it's all great as well, because they're all like super cool guys. So it's just such a nice thing to have, especially because writers, the vast majority of our time is spent sitting at a desk on our own, like creating fictional worlds and not talking to people. So I think it's great that we have this other outlet. And the other thing I do is also there's a Scotland writers football team. So I've been I was one of the people that organized it at the start. I don't organize anymore, but so that's another thing, another way. I think writers are always looking for chances to socialize, if we can. And that's great. We just were playing the England writers football team at the weekend there and beat them on penalties. It was a close game, 1-1 draw, and then we beat them on penalties. But then we all kind of go out afterwards and go out for a meal and do a book event and do readings and stuff like that, and just generally catch up with the England guys as well. So yeah, I try and make that's kind of my world, is speaking to other writers. So you try and make as many pals as possible.
And do you hear a lot from your readers?
Yeah, always. More so now, I think. It gradually just builds up and builds up, I think. The kind of higher profile you get emails and you get messages and websites, and also like obviously social media, you get loads of stuff like that. It's great. It's always really interesting. It's fascinating how I used to think, I remember years and years ago, someone, I can't remember who it was, an author saying, writing a book is like a two-way process. Like the readers bring their own stuff to it. It's like a conversation. And I remember thinking, that's bullshit. Like you're writing the book, right? You're writing it. That's the words on the page. But unfortunately, she was absolutely right. It is a conversation that actually, it's really fascinating what readers bring to a book. They bring their own experiences, their own value judgments or not, their own kind of morality to what's happening. And people focus on very different things. Like, some people will be really interested in the technical plotting, murder, mystery aspect of something. Some people will focus on like character elements of one character, or whether it's a goodie or a baddie or somewhere in between. And so I find that endlessly fascinating. And for a reader to say something, I found this in this book. Who am I to say, no, you didn't? Like, no, it's like, that's ridiculous. That's a very authoritarian way of looking at it. It's like, once you write the book, it is out there, and then people can take what they want from it. And what I've noticed is I'm definitely getting more reader feedback from these Skelfs books, the last 3 novels and the previous ones. And almost all of the sort of the feedback I get, the chat I get from readers is about the 3 women, is about the characters. And I find that really interesting, because obviously before I started writing these books, I'd written standalones, so they're all separate sets of characters mostly. And I was in awe of I was chatting to Val and Mark Billingham and folk like that, who've got like 20 books in a series or something like that. Because I didn't really know how that worked, how they could do that, how they stop from repeating themselves, or how they come up with new ways to sort of shape what they're doing and stuff like that. It was such an incredible skill. And I realized that, I do spend a lot of time plotting these books, but actually the characters are the key. So when you have returning characters, that's what readers really love. That's really come home to me actually with these books, these 3 books, is that they are on a journey now with like Dorothy, Jenny, and Hannah, it feels like, and they want to know more about what's happening in their lives. I mean, if you make the plot a bunch of garbage, they will tell you, obviously, but I think they're more interested in the sort of dynamics between the 3 women and how they're all getting on with their lives, which is really interesting. It's again a new experience for me, and I really enjoy it actually.
What was your favourite first as an author?
My favorite first. I mean, it has to just be, I'm sure everyone says it's just seeing their book in a shop for the first time. I saw somebody buying my book quite recently for the first time, actually. That was like book 11. I mean, I'd seen my own book in a shop, and I'd seen someone reading my book on like a train, both of which were kind of amazing. But I actually I was in Waterstones, in one of the Waterstones in Edinburgh, an Ocean Terminal, and because I was waiting, my daughter has a dance class just in the sort of studios up the stairs. So I was just in sort of, I genuinely wasn't standing looking at my books waiting. I was actually looking at somebody else's books. And then I just turned around, and there was a woman who had A Dark Matter, which is the first Skells book, and a couple of other things in her hand. Like she'd picked up stuff to go to the till, and she was still sort of looking around. I was like, holy shit. And so I didn't stalk her. I hung around in the shop until she went to till, and she bought them. And I was like, oh wow, that's great. I thought, like, what would you go up and say? That's weird if you go up and say, excuse me, that's my book. I think that's fucking weird. I don't know. I'm not confident enough to go, yes, that's my book. That'd be weird.
I would have, because like, do you want me to sign it? Because all of us readers love signed books. So I'd be totally like, oh, you picked up my book and do you want me to sign it?
I know, I should have done that. I know, that's stupid not to. Oh.
Yeah, oh well. If you're able to spend a day with any author, dead or alive, who would you like to spend a day with?
Wow, any author, dead or alive? Ooh, it's interesting. Yeah. Who would I like to spend a day with? I think I've been reading a lot of Ursula K. Le Guin books recently. I've been getting a lot into science fiction. And I think she sounds like an endlessly fascinating person with loads of ideas. Sadly, no longer with us, but also she wrote a book about creative writing called Steering the Craft. I'm actually looking at it now, it's on my desk, which is really interesting as well. It's got a lot of interesting insight into the whole thing, and I think it would be. And she just seemed like, to have her head screwed on right. She just didn't. I mean, long before, other writers were worrying about things like this, she was kind of just dealing with issues like politics and gender and stuff like that, through her science fiction. Kind of it felt effortlessly, and colonization, all sorts of other stuff. She was addressing these big ideas through brilliant sort of, propulsive narratives that were really engaging, but really thoughtful at the same time. And I just think it would be great to get her take on most things. I went through, after I read a bunch of her books, I just sort of scoured like podcasts for interviews with her. I just listened to loads of interviews with her, and like I was constantly like walking down the road or through the park, nodding to myself, going, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, okay, I totally get that. So she just seems to be like a really smart person that would have been a great person to pick her brains.
If you're able to travel to any period of time, either forwards or backwards, where would you go?
Wow, great. Forwards, right? I never understand people who say backwards. I never understand that. Like why would you go back to a time when you kind of know what's been going on there, when you can go forwards and find out? Jesus Christ. As for when and where, God knows. I mean, at the moment, it feels like there's not going to be a planet. There's not going to be much left of planet Earth, like much more than about 6 months from now. But I would go quite far into the future. Like, I don't know, pick a number. Not hugely, not millions of years, but something like, if you think we've been around sort of humans for, I don't know, 10,000 years. So maybe another 10,000 years in the future. What the hell is that going to look like? God knows, back to being like cavemen and cavewomen maybe. I think someone like that would be really fascinating, or millions of years in the future. I mean, there wouldn't be any humanity left, or it would be totally changed. So maybe you wouldn't be able to communicate with anyone. I don't know, it'd be weird. I've kind of got this idea of a fantasy novel that I want to write, which does that, which actually does that, which kind of leaps hugely backwards and forwards in time, like millions of years, hundreds of millions of years, actually. So, so I could do all of that, and then that'd be good. I could put it down as research for the book. Yeah, so 10,000, let's say 10,000 years in the future. God knows what it'd be like. Or maybe, no, see, now I'm confused because I couldn't communicate with someone from 10,000 years in the past. So maybe 1,000 years in the future, because 1,000 years ago was 1000 AD. We could just about maybe communicate language-wise with someone from that time. Like that's Chaucer kind of time, isn't it? I don't know. I'm not very good with history. So yeah, let's say 1,000 years in the future. Keep it nice and simple.
Yeah, I want to go back.
When would you go back to?
Well, I was born in 1983. So I want to go back to the 1980s, but as like a 20-year-old. So
Okay.
I get to experience the music, nothing else, just the music. That's all I want. I want to see Queen, I want to see Bowie, I want to see Michael Jackson, Madonna, and everything, all in their prime, and Prince, you know, that I never got to experience because I was a baby or they died before I was old enough to experience and appreciate them.
If you wanted to go to all those things, you would probably have to get quite a big bank loan to afford the tickets, really, even back in the 80s.
Yeah, that's a good point. But, you know, it's worth it.
Or if you just take money with you, if you sort of take out all your money now, because of inflation working the other way, you probably would be fine when you get back there. You could probably buy a whole row of Michael Jackson tickets.
I have £3 at the minute, so probably not.
Okay, maybe not.
Yeah. I'll wait for a couple of weeks until I have some money and then go back.
It would be really interesting to, having said that about the past, it would be really interesting to go back to when you were a little kid and view it as an adult, actually, to see how wrong your impression is of, you know, of your world that you grew up in, because it was through the eyes of a 5-year-old or whatever. That would be quite interesting.
Yeah. I found out when I spoke to Luca Veste that we were born on the exact same day, which was very weird.
Wow, that's
Literally.
amazing.
Yeah, that was weird. It was like, yeah.
Twins.
Yeah. He said he was going to go talk to his mum. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's. Who was your first celebrity crush?
First celebrity crush. Probably, well, there was a couple maybe. I guess technically, Agnetha from ABBA. I absolutely loved her. She was amazing. But actually, the one that I really fell hard for was Adam Ant. Like, oh my God, I was such a huge Adam and the Ants fan. And I just loved Adam Ant. I just thought he was the coolest guy, which he kind of was, still is kind of. Which I just thought he was just like the coolest guy on the planet. So there you go. And if they ever did a duet, the two of them, that would, my head would have exploded.
Yeah. Not quite sure how that would work, but yeah,
No,
that would be
I'm not
cool.
quite sure
Actually,
how.
I agree. Yeah. Where's the strangest or funniest place you've ever woken up?
Strangest or funniest place I've ever woken up? Good question. Where have I ever woken up? Well, I have once woken up from sleepwalking in the corridor of a hotel in Dublin, and I was naked, and the fire alarm was going off, so suddenly the corridor was really busy.
No.
So then I had to yeah, and then I had to go down to the front desk naked to get a spare key from my room. That's good fun.
Yeah, sounds yeah.
And like the foyer was just full of people who'd had to evacuate their rooms. It was great. Good times.
Yeah. Bless you.
Next question. Moving on.
Moving on. Do you have any strange or unusual party tricks or talents?
Party tricks or talents? Do I have any strange party tricks or talents? I don't know. Do I? No. I can juggle. I can juggle 3 things. That's only 3. It's not like amazing. But I mean, I taught myself to juggle when I was quite wee. What else? Party tricks or talents? I mean, I can play the drums. That's why I'm drumming in a band, but that's not that unusual. I can play the harmonica a little bit. I can play Flower of Scotland on the harmonica. What else? I don't know. What do other people say for this? What's the best answer you've had for that one?
I don't know, actually, that's a good question. God, I can't remember. I'd have to think about it and get back to you.
Yeah. Party tricks. No, that's probably it. I've got that thing where I can roll my tongue. Like, that's genetic, isn't it? Can you do that? Yeah. Some people can. Some people just can't do it. It's weird, isn't it?
No, I can't understand how people can't, but yeah.
It's strange. My dad can raise one eyebrow, which is not that unusual, like one eyebrow at a time, but he can also wiggle one earlobe at a time. He can wiggle one ear. He can wiggle one ear and raise his other eyebrow and then do the opposite. Sadly, that has not transferred genetically to me, because that would be quite a good party trick.
Yeah, that's really cool. If I was to ask those nearest and dearest to you what your most annoying habits are, what would they say?
Most annoying habits? Good question. Good questions. Probably too many to mention. I tend to interrupt people, which is in bad form, basically. It's just ignorant, isn't it? I've got an idea and I just blah, blah, blah and say it when you're in the middle of it.
It's excitement, isn't it? I do that. I get excited because I thought of something and then, yeah. Like,
yeah, I tend to interrupt people, I think. So my wife would probably say that. What else? I don't know. I mean, I swear a lot. I don't really see that as a bad thing. So fuck them.
You're right.
Yeah. So no, yeah, interrupting people. That's probably the answer, I think.
So you said you're working on book 4 at the moment. So what's coming next for you?
Well, I'm just doing the edits of book 4 in the Skelf series. I was sort of planning a 5th Skelf book. That's definitely under contract, so I'm going to be writing that next. I also have a science fiction novel out there in the world, trying to find a publisher. And the way I've written it, it ends on a cliffhanger, so it definitely needs a sequel. So that needs to be written. And I've got an idea for what I'm going to do for that. And I mentioned briefly in passing that I'm quite interested in writing a fantasy novel, kind of. I don't even know if it is a fantasy novel, but anyway, about a girl who hears voices in her head, which turn out to be real, set over 500 million years in Edinburgh, like you do. So sort of time travel-y thing. And then, that's probably enough to be keeping me going. I think that's like 3 projects on the go. I've still got a couple of ideas for standalone books, which are kind of on the back burner. I'm enjoying writing the Skelf so much at the moment, actually. So I'm just kind of keen to just keep doing it while you enjoy doing it, I think is the main thing. So that's always there in the background if I get bored or if I want to try and, do something else in the meantime, give myself a break. I know other writers like Val, like she would always write one book from one series, then one book from a different series afterwards, so she doesn't kind of get bored of writing the same thing. That's an interesting idea. That's great if it works in terms of deadlines and schedules and stuff. But so I would like to keep, just keep doing as much variety as possible. But that's 3 projects anyway that I've definitely got that I want to do.
We'll be seeing you at any of the festivals this year.
Will you? Yes. I don't think I'm going to be at Harrogate this year for various reasons. I think I'm away on holiday, actually. I'm definitely going to be at the Edinburgh Book Festival. I am also going to be at Bloody Scotland, I think. And there's a few other ones I'm doing, like, I think they're mostly in Scotland. Ullapool Book Festival and Butte Noir, I think I'm going to be at, which is a great one. Have you been to Butte for that one? No,
I've heard good things, so
yeah, it's really cool. Are you a Harrogate regular or?
Last year was the first time I went to any book festival. So I went to Harrogate for the first time, I went to Bloody Scotland for the first time. I loved both of them and I'm going to both again this year.
Right, yeah, so I usually would go to Harrogate, but I'm not doing this year for some reason. So that's the other ones, definitely Bloody Scotland, I think, Edinburgh Book Festival. And, the usual caveat of anyone who wants to invite me, I'm happy to come along. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I live like way down south in Bedfordshire. So
Right.
Scotland is just a mission for me. It took me
Yeah.
from, I think when I came to bloody Scotland, I left my house at 6:30, 7 in the morning and got to Scotland at 3.
Oof, it's dedication though, isn't it? That's good.
Yeah, it was awesome. Didn't care. Loved it.
It's a great atmosphere like Scotland. It always has been. Like, you know, that's I think this is this year its 10th year, I think. It's its 10th anniversary. And it's always been amazing. It's been so good at supporting up and coming like writers, myself included, when I was like, you know, younger. And it's just really great. All sorts of other like the you know, letting people read you know, before the main events and stuff like that, and then pitch perfect like events and stuff like that. It's so good. Such a good atmosphere in that place. Great, love it.
Yeah, I saw Tina Baker do her reading dressed as a bee.
I saw that, yeah.
And then somehow she ended up in a thing outside because she was dressed as a bee, but they were doing a Save the Bee thing. It was, yeah, and bless her.
I heard about that. That's so bizarre.
It is, bless her. Yeah, she's a crazy lady, but she's lovely.
Crazy.
Yeah, she's insane. Well, you may be pleased to know I don't have any more questions for you, unless you think there's anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to tell us about.
Is there anything you haven't asked me? No, I don't think so. The well is dry. I've got no other chat.
Good. You feel like you've been suitably, you know, counselled, or whatever the word would be?
It's more like a grilling, isn't it, than a counselling, I think. No, it was good. It was good. It was great. Yes, I feel that was you know, you'd pay 50 quid for that kind of session with a therapist. So that was thanks. Got it for nothing. Thanks, Donna.
You're welcome. So just before we go, would you just like to tell everyone where they can get your books from and where they can find out more about you?
Yes. So you can get any of my books from your local independent bookshops. Small indies need as much help as possible, especially at the moment after the pandemic when a lot of them struggled. My publisher is Orendo Books. You can order it directly from them. Again, it's a fairly small publisher, and they can do with all the help they can get. You can find out more about me. I've got a website, dougjohnston.com, but more up-to-date stuff is usually on social media, on Twitter, where I am at Doug_Johnston, and Instagram, where I am at writer Doug J, I think. So that tends to be where all the cheeky gossip is.
Yes, well, thank you very much.
Cheers. Thanks, Donna.